So I played The Last of Us Part 1, Part 2. I respect, admire the tenacity of The Last of Us Part 2. Structured the storytelling of it, like putting you into two different perspectives, changing, who you play. You start off as Ellie, and then you start playing as Abby, the supposed villain of the game. What's going on here? It takes a big swerve from the original Part 1. That certainly caused a lot of controversy and uproar in the fandom. I found it refreshing, but I also found it exhausting in many ways. I found it unrelentingly bleak. The exploration of the cycle of violence became tedious and repetitive as the game went along. It's also extremely violent and realistic, more so than I think any other game I've played. I can deal with that in a 2-hour movie, maybe a show, but in this grueling experience where you're actually participating in that violence as a gamer, it's not something I really want to revisit. At the end of the day, it didn't feel like it added up to anything meaningful beyond violence is cyclical. A very centrist view, not really addressing as much how one side has more of the power and how another side is merely responding to that. I would recommend checking out this article by Emmanuel Mayberg, The Not So Hidden Israeli Politics, The Last of Us Part 2, for some more elaboration of the politics of the game that may rub you the wrong way. I don't know. There's also Rob Zachney's review that does include spoilers, of course, all these articles. There's also the Cavernacle on YouTube, who offers a slightly different perspective. He's more of a fan of the games. So we're going to get into the spoilers for The Last of Us Season 2, as well as the game, at least up to the point where the HBO series has adapted so far. Season 1, I think, turned out pretty well. I enjoyed Season 1. It was easier to adapt, right? And it ends in that big question of did Joel do the right thing in saving Ellie at the expense of damning the rest of the world? There's no cure now, and he had to kill all these people to do that, right? But then the Season 2 really explores the ramifications of that. I thought it was doing a pretty good job as it started off. Spoilers once more again, just in case there are spoilers here coming up. Beware. Okay, so the big moment, of course, in the beginning of the season was Joel's death. It probably was a little bit more effective in the game. The strongest moments, though, of this season have to be the moments with Joel, right? That's partly to do with Pedro Pascal's performance. Really, the core of this show in these two seasons is the relationship between Ellie and Joel. That promise, that secret, that lie that Joel and Ellie share. Bringing this flashback episode into the end of the season really brings that all together. This moment of growth between them two, of connection, we've been yearning for since the ending of Season 1. To focus so much on the Seattle storyline was maybe the mistake of this season. A better thing would have been to just have the story focus on Ellie and Joel and Jesse and Dina in Jackson. And then in Season 3, we do the whole revenge thing in Seattle, especially since this season was only 7 episodes, 2 episodes shorter. I wouldn't have minded if it was 6 episodes and just pretty much mostly Jackson stuff. Maybe they could have had the Joel death be the penultimate episode and then have the flashback being the finale, and then give us as viewers some more motivation to come back for Season 3 when the whole revenge cycle starts up again with Ellie trying to hunt down Abby, and then we start from Allie's perspective right off the bat in Season 3, and then we see her relationship with the WLF and other characters, which I won't get into because that'll be spoilers, as we start to build some sympathy for her. But at this point, it's better to focus on Ellie's and Joel's group, Jesse with Tommy for the time being, especially because it is, again, a shorter season. You know, all the messiness of all these factions and characters are really showcased here in the finale, which may be the worst finale of a show that I've seen in a long time. It's reminding me of the finale of the most recent season of The House of Dragon, and how they try to cram in all this stuff and then it just feels super rushed and then just ends abruptly. Like, it feels like this episode should have been the premiere of the next season, you know. And then you have a scene like this where Ellie is just completely unhinged at this point. Her only focus is her revenge. She ends up being washed up onto the island of the Seraphites, and you have this sequence here of her getting captured, only for like seconds later for them to have to retreat because their town is being attacked. And then she immediately gets back in the boat and goes back to the aquarium. That whole segment just seems super unnecessary. In the inside the episode segment after the show, they actually had to elaborate on this. The reason they included that scene was to juxtapose it with this one, where Ellie wanted to save this kid from the WLF while Jesse was like, no, we're outnumbered. So then the purpose of this scene was to showcase the other side of like, oh, like they would be just as brutal towards you. We've already been bombarded with this theme, violence begets violence. We're going to see their violence, the Seraphites' violence in the next season. How long is this? Yeah, so basically 2 minutes of just her being captured and let go. They actually said this was a moment that they deleted from the game, and it seems like rightfully so. Like, it just completely derails the momentum of her stupid revenge quest. It just feels so messy, and I'm kind of like flabbergasted, you know, on how they like fumbled this last episode so much. You know, maybe the executives mandated that this season be shorter. They didn't get as much of a budget maybe as last season. This is all just speculation, but it certainly feels like this season is not up to the standards of where maybe the creators wanted it to be, particularly by the ending. Because there was a lot of great moments in this season. I did appreciate how they expanded the world building in Jackson. And the penultimate episode was probably the best episode of the series, you know, if not like top 2 or top 3. Thematically, the us versus them dilemma of the story of The Last of Us versus The Last of Them, etc. I feel like that's going to have to be explored more deeply in the next seasons. We got more the personal aspect of that dilemma with Ellie and Joel in this season, which I think was good. And then we got some of that a little bit with Ellie and Jesse here even. It does feel like they crammed in Jesse's storyline here at the finish line. But yeah, this adaptation business is tricky in it. I wonder how Druckmann and crew are going to respond to the criticism from the game in the next season, see if they update the story, if they're going to go beyond the cycle of violence cliche, beyond just revenge. They investigate more how some may retaliate because that's the only option for survival, and how that leads some Seraphites into religious extremism. That's not to say they're not aware of the difference in power that all these factions have. The WLF does come off as the more evil side thus far, and I think maybe in the game too. I am curious just to see the differences between the game and the show, but I'm not exactly confident that they'll improve much. And the other thing is that the reason behind this game really is that Druckmann, when he saw some Israeli soldiers being hung in the West Bank and people cheering, and he wanted to kill the people who did that, but then he thought better. And Druckmann feels like that's a universal feeling of hate that everybody has to enact revenge on your enemies. He wanted to translate that to the game. I don't think those feelings are universal, you know. And a part of that article from Vice is the idea that, like, where's that hate come from? You know, that feeling of hateful revenge, whether it's after like some terrorist attack or something, or a personal attack on our loved ones. We have this hatred to kill in response. That's, you know, could be taught by society, by an imperialist government, perhaps, whether it's the U.S. empire, the Israeli empire. But as we see in this show too, like, our way forward isn't through violence and competition, but through cooperation. You know, the communistic Jackson, that's the best place to be here in the apocalypse. Just as a natural response would be to wonder what got someone to do those acts. Like, what led someone to enact that violence. The real oppressors are committing even more violence on a larger scale, you know? And how to rehabilitate that. Stop the violence, but also not continue the status quo by isolating, trapping a group of people, coercing them into a lower status, them versus an us. That leads to violence indirectly. The ingredients are there in this story to say more, but it hasn't gotten there yet, I don't think. It's a different beast, of course, this story. Even the decision of the casting changes things a bit. I don't mind so much that they kept Bella Ramsey as Ellie in season 2. I can roll with that. Maybe they should have kept Abby closer to the game Abby. Maybe they didn't have to match Ellie's physique. Like, it does feel like a missed opportunity to have like a buff woman in a starring role. It would have made for a bigger contrast and maybe poking fun at the Gamergate crowd who hated on Abby's masculine appearance or whatever because she had muscles. It also kind of feels like maybe they're appeasing, you know, that crowd a bit. I think also because this final episode of this season feels really unrefined. I'm starting to question all the other decisions in the season, in the show. Like, you know, are there higher ups at Warner Brothers who are meddling with the storytelling a little too much, trying to appease some of the game's detractors, or trying to bring in a broader audience at the expense of storytelling? I don't know. Those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts? How did season 2 work out for you? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you next time. Under the moonlight. Bye bye.